Hello, everyone. My name is Bridget, and this is Ashwini and Pippa. And today on Trial by Podcast, the three of us are unpacking Australia's social media ban for under 16s. What drove it, what the law actually says, what platforms are caught, and whether it's really fit for purpose. Are young people safer? Imagine if you woke up and every one of your social media accounts had disappeared, not because you deleted them, but because the law banned you. That's now a reality for under 16s in Australia. But young people are not naive. They understand the risks of social media, and many don't think that a blanket ban solves them. Some are finding workarounds, VPNs, hidden apps, or lesser known platforms that are far less regulated and potentially more dangerous.
So, to understand the ban, we have to start with why it was introduced in the first place. The policy didn't come out of nowhere, and there are a few key policy drivers which motivated the swift passing of the Online Safety Amendment Bill that was passed by the Australian government. The biggest motivator for the introduction of the bill is protecting children from the harms of social media. In 2025, the Australian government study revealed that 96% of children aged 10 to 15 use social media, with 7 out of 10 children being exposed to harmful content on social media.
Yeah, and we're talking about some really concerning stuff online. Content that promotes eating disorders or self-harm, violent material, content promoting misogynistic ideas, and also grooming behavior online. About 1 in 7 children reported experiences that could amount to grooming, and more than half said they'd been victims of cyberbullying.
Politically, this created pressure. Governments were being asked, why are kids being protected everywhere else but online? We regulate alcohol, driving, gambling, but social media, which is arguably just as impactful on developing minds, has largely been left to self-regulation.
So the ban was implemented as a child protection measure. Concerns for children's safety online and the impact of harmful content on youth mental health has been at the forefront of the ban. But it's not just the content itself that affects young people. It's how social media platforms are designed to measure worth. Apps like TikTok and Instagram turn likes, followers, comments into a kind of social currency. The Australian Psychological Society has noted that when teenagers don't receive instant engagement on their posts, it can feel like rejection, so leading to declining self-esteem over time.
Yeah, and I think this really rings true when I think of what it was like when we were young and social media first had its presence. It did feel like suddenly you were measuring your worth through likes, follows, and who gets the most attention. It's really concerning because it is at an age where your sense of identity is still forming.
Totally. And that feeling we had has intensified by how addictive these platforms have become. Mental health professionals are increasingly raising concerns about problem internet use, or PUI for short, which is a condition linked to dependency on social media causing mood changes and harm to social and emotional functioning. Asa Raskin, who was one of the engineers who actually designed the Infinite Scroll, openly said that this feature has been designed to keep users hooked, describing it as sort of a behavioral cocaine. So every time you open an app, you get that dopamine hit, making it harder to step away.
From the government's perspective, the design is contributing to a broader mental health crisis among young people. There's a clear correlation between heavy social media use and rising rates of mental health distress, including hospitalisation for intentional self-harm.
Another motivator for this act was to place the responsibility on big tech companies to ensure that their platforms are safe for young people to be on. And by shifting this responsibility onto the social media platforms themselves, the law is sending a very clear message. Keeping kids safe online isn't solely a parental responsibility, and it isn't on young people either. This is a shared responsibility with the companies designing and profiting from these platforms.
Yeah, and I think that shift in responsibility really reflects a concern that many parents are already feeling very deeply. Research from eSafety shows just how big the issue is. 95% of Australian caregivers say that online safety is one of the toughest challenges they face as parents. Radio host and advocate for the new law, Michael Whitfield, encapsulates that feeling. Speaking about his own children, he said, I just had this major fear thinking strangers you wouldn't welcome into your house are being welcomed into my kids' screens. And that's what scared the hell out of me.
That concern has been echoed at the highest level of government. Communications Minister Annika Wells has made it clear that the government won't back down, saying it will not be intimidated by threats or big tech and that it will stand firm on behalf of Australian parents. Together, these voices highlight what's really driving the push for this reform, not politics or profit, but a growing anxiety among families about what kids are being exposed to online and who has access to them. Whether the ban actually achieves that aim is still up for debate, but these concerns are at the heart of why the legislation exists.
So, what is the actual social media ban? In 2024, Australia introduced a world first policy, the Online Safety Amendment Social Media Minimum Age Act 2024. It came into effect on 10 December 2025, and using the language from the legislation, it says a provider of an age-restricted social media platform must take reasonable steps to prevent age-restricted users having accounts with the age-restricted social media platform. So this is quite wordy, so we'll just break it down. Age-restricted users are Australian children who are under 16 years old. That's the easy part. What's more difficult to understand is the next part of the legislation.
So, what are social media platforms? Age-restricted social media platforms means an electronic service that lets users interact with each other socially between two or more end users, connect with others, and post content, or is another electronic service specifically listed in the legislative rules. According to guidance from the eSafety Commissioner, platforms expected to fall within the ban include Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, X, YouTube, Reddit, and even streaming platforms like Twitch and Kick. But legally, that list is not binding.
Exactly. The Act uses a definition of age-restricted social media platforms rather than a fixed list. And this creates real ambiguity there, especially when it comes to new or emerging platforms.
Yeah, and that's crucial because young people are incredibly adaptable. If Instagram is blocked, they won't just log off the internet forever. They'll likely move to newer platforms that the regulator may not actually be aware of yet. So there's a risk that the ban ends up targeting the biggest, most well-known social media platforms while unintentionally driving kids towards other platforms which have fewer safeguards and are under less scrutiny.
So, what does the law actually expect the social media platforms to do? The magic phrase in the legislation is that platforms must take reasonable steps to prevent under 16s from having accounts. But what actually counts as reasonable? This is an objective standard. The eSafety guidance says reasonable steps will be contextually dependent with consideration given to the regulatory landscape, technological feasibility, the circumstances of the provider, and the intention of the social media minimum age obligation. But really, social media platforms do need to ask themselves how a hypothetical reasonable person would act in similar circumstances.
The eSafety guidance has provided some guiding principles and says that reasonable steps should be reliable, accurate, robust, and effective. They should be privacy preserving and data minimizing. They should be accessible, inclusive, and fair, transparent, proportionate, and finally, they should be evidence-based and responsive to emerging technology and risk. But this is still one of the most heavily criticised parts of the Act. Despite these guiding principles, the law doesn't clearly define what technologies must be used, how accurate they need to be, or how platforms should balance privacy with safety.
So, under the new legislation, social media companies should follow the eSafety Commissioner's guidance to use what's called a waterfall approach. And this means that platforms should take a layered step-by-step method for age assurance. Instead of just using one strict age verification, platforms must apply a series of increasingly strong checks, moving down the waterfall, as it's called, only if earlier steps are not enough.
For example, a platform is expected to ask for date of birth and use account behaviour as a low intrusion check. If the user appears to be under 16, the platform should apply stronger methods such as a parental confirmation, age estimation technology, or limited date identity checks. The strongest check should only be used where proportionate. This approach allows for social media companies to have autonomy in tailoring checks to their service and limits unnecessary data collection. The government has also decided to fast-track a big recommendation from the Online Safety Act review called the Digital Duty of Care. This promised legislation is supposedly going to be proactive and future-focused, requiring platforms to continuously adapt their safety measures as technology, features, and online risks evolve over time. We hope that this legislation might provide some concrete clarity on social media platforms and what they're actually required to do here.
Essentially, social media platforms are expected to offer practical alternatives to blanket age checks and also collect as little personal data as possible. Various technologies can be used when someone is signing up for an account, such as AI-based age estimation, biometric scans, behavioral modeling, and ID verification. The methods must meet regulatory requirements and respect privacy laws and digital rights such as consent, human oversight to any use of AI, and data protection. Importantly, the legislation prohibits social media platforms from collecting government-issued ID as the sole method, but may offer it as an option if it also offers a reasonable alternative. So Meta, for example, has said it will use an age estimation technology only asking for extra information when formal age checks are needed. Platforms must also perform regular self-assessments of their age verification features to confirm that compliance with the new legislation.
So the big question really is, does this all work? Earlier in this year, in January, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that more than 4.7 million social media accounts had been taken down across Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, Reddit, Twitch, Threads, and Kik since the ban.
That said, enforcing the ban hasn't been easy. A lot of young people are still finding ways to get around these age verification systems. Snapchat, for example, has been a particular challenge for the government, with many parents saying that the age limits are easy to bypass. For example, if someone enters a fake birthday or tricks facial recognition tools by making themselves look like they're older. This raises questions about how effective these systems really are in real life and how realistic it is to enforce age bans online. Another issue is kids finding other ways to access social media, leading them to go to unsafe websites. So the big question here is, are these measures really working in practice? What do you guys think?
It seems like social media platforms have taken clear steps towards implementing the ban through these age verification barriers. And even though it seems like accounts are being removed from these platforms, young people are still finding ways around it. I think the legislation is indicative of the stance of the Australian government, but it may take further adjustments and improvements in the technology to really ensure that under 16s are kept off the apps.
Yeah, I think getting the law in place is really just the starting line. Legislation does set a clear standard and can send a strong message to platforms about what's expected of them. But actually, how these platforms enforce the law is what really matters. Looking at things like how these platforms implement the rules, how seriously they take online safety, how they manage the privacy implications of age verification, and whether the approach is actually taken up by other countries, I think that will ultimately determine whether this new law has really made a difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think the effectiveness of this ban is reliant on the age verification efforts of social media platforms. Kids under 16 aren't being punished for having accounts, so there's no real deterrent for them. And kids are crafty. Lots of them grew up on social media, so I think that a lot of kids are going to find ways to circumvent age verification, whether it's giving fake information or just making themselves look older.
Yeah, so let's talk about the penalties. Age-restricted social media platforms that fail to take these reasonable steps may receive a civil penalty of 150,000 penalty units, which is currently valued at 49.5 million. Sounds huge until you remember who we're talking about. Meta alone makes billions in annual revenue. Former Facebook executive Stephen Sheila said it takes Meta less than 2 hours to make that account, covering the cost of this penalty. So is 49.5 million really a deterrent, or is this just the cost of doing business? It's telling that the law doesn't punish families or kids. Because this legislation isn't really about behaviour change at an individual level, it is a big message to big tech. Whether they actually listen is another question entirely.
I think one big question is why the line was drawn at 16 years rather than, say, 13 or 18. There's no clear neurological cutoff at 16. It's more of a policy compromise than a scientific certainty. It also raises autonomy issues. 16-year-olds, they're allowed to work, they can pay tax, they can consent to medical treatment in some circumstances, but can't have a social media account. The ban also faces criticism about the impact on young people with disabilities as well.
So, what are other countries doing about this? Internationally, Australia is an outlier, but it's not alone. And the UK is a useful comparison. Like Australia, it's been under pressure to act on youth online safety. But so far, it's resisted a full under 16 ban like Australia has done. Instead, the Online Safety Act 2023 takes a regulatory approach. Platforms now have legal duties to remove illegal content, protect children from harmful material, apply age limits where relevant, and carry out risk assessments, all overseen by a more powerful regulator, Ofcom.
But the concerns are familiar. There's a worry that stronger age verification could push kids into less regulated platforms or raise privacy issues if companies rely on these ID checks or facial age estimations. Because of that, the UK government has opened a public consultation exploring options ranging from an Australia-style ban to softer measures like switching off addictive features or trialling overnight curfews. Many of these ideas are being tested through pilots first, which does help avoid unintended consequences. That focus on testing and flexibility really sets up an interesting contrast with what's happening elsewhere.
I know France has taken a bit of a stricter position. Their proposed legislation would ban social media access for children under 15, putting platforms like Instagram and TikTok off limits, which is quite close to Australia's approach. The President, Emmanuel Macron, framed the issue quite bluntly when he said, "Our children's brains are not for sale." What's different, though, is the structure of this ban. The French regulator would create two lists, one of the higher risk platforms banned for under 15s and another of lower risk platforms where access would require explicit parent consent. That tiered model raises an obvious question about whether one blanket rule is really suitable for all types of platforms.
Denmark offers another good variation. The government has announced plans to ban social media use for children under 15, one of the strongest proposals in Europe, but with an important carve-out. Parents would be allowed to consent to their child using social media from age 13. Alongside that, Denmark is investing heavily in online safety infrastructure, recognising that regulation alone isn't enough to protect kids' digital lives. What these countries have in common is experimentation, pilots, consultations, and laid regulation rather than a single sweeping ban like Australia.
So the hardest part of this debate is that most lawmakers didn't grow up online the way today's younger generation has. Social media isn't just entertainment, it's communication, identity, activism, and community. We absolutely need stronger protections for young people, but banning access entirely may ignore the reality that kids won't just disconnect, they'll adapt.
So the real question isn't should we protect children online? Of course we should do that. It's how we do that without silencing young people's voices, compromising their rights, or pretending that the digital world can just be switched off.
And that's why I think this debate is far from over.